Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined again this week by Dave for a bonus episode. We're going to do a quick free agency reaction pod. It is our second episode of the week. We obviously had the joint pod with the 30 on Broadway guys. Hope everybody enjoyed that before free agency started. Made some predictions. I think we were mostly on the nose with those. And now we have some moves to react to. Dave, how's everything going as you get ready for this long holiday weekend on the 4th of July?
Things are good. I'm glad my technical issues that delayed us for, I think, about 20 minutes at this point are over. Hopefully, it sounds the same because I couldn't get my mic to connect. So now I'm using a different one that apparently is in my headphones. But other than that, I'm good. The Rangers had a good day 1/2 of free agency. Chris Drury really knocked it out of the park. I got to give him credit.
Yeah, so let's dive right in. Now, by now, and I'll recap the moves. Just I know everyone knows them. If you listen to this podcast, you're plugged in enough to know what the Rangers did. But obviously, signing Gavrikov to a pretty decent contract. Now, there are some details of it that aren't totally optimal, but we'll talk about those and we'll get to that. Obviously, the Keandre Miller trade also went down, and that brought back Scott Morrow and 2 draft picks in the 26th draft, a first and a second rounder. They also made some interesting depth signings, a couple more for Hartford, right? Derek Pouliot was a Hartford signing. But a guy who will be in the NHL is Taylor Radish, projects to be a third line winger. Only a couple seasons removed from 20 goals in Chicago. Obviously, that was on a bad team, but a guy that can contribute and a guy that strikes me as a very Mike Sullivan type player. So I couldn't agree more with you, Dave. Just my initial reaction was, once the Keandre Miller trade happened and it seemed like the Rangers really kind of stuck to their guns and got as much as they could out of Carolina in that trade, that made the Gavrikov signing make a lot more sense. And all of a sudden, I think you can sort of see the plan, which is, what we talked about earlier this week on the pod, was that none of us could see the plan. It didn't really, the puzzle pieces were not fitting. And now it seems like they're fitting a little bit better.
Yeah, it's like when you actually put a puzzle together and you're missing that one piece. You can't find it in the sea of 500 other puzzle pieces, and then you finally find it, and then you're like, okay, now I can do the rest. Or maybe it's just me and my, I guess, struggles when I'm putting together certain puzzles. But you're laughing, so I guess it's just a me thing.
No. I think it's no. I thought it was a great analogy. Honestly, I think that's very true. And I mean, you use the metaphor. Can you see the forest for the trees all the time in your, in your written stuff? And that, I think that often happens with Chris Drury, where you have to sort of step back and look at the entire forest and not focus on the trees. And that's a larger point we'll get to, I think, a little bit later. But yeah, so like I said, I think it's pretty clear that there was a plan here, and it did hinge upon nailing the Keandre Miller trade. So I guess that's the first question, Dave, and I want to hear your kind of reaction now that we have, you've had a couple days to marinate on it. What is your overall reaction to that trade, and how would you grade it on like a, A to B to C scale, the Keandre trade?
I love it, but I hate it. I love the return. It is as great of a return as you can get for a guy who obviously wasn't signed at the time, who the deal was contingent on that massive contract that he signed, and a guy that clearly didn't want to be in New York anymore. Well, I shouldn't say clearly. I should say based off the rumors, didn't want to be in New York anymore. He didn't want to sign long term. He really wanted, again, this is all the rumor mill. He didn't want to sign long term. He wanted to go to free agency, so a 2-year deal would have walked him right to free agency. Chris Drury didn't want to do that. He wanted either a long-term deal or nothing. And since they couldn't meet anywhere in the middle, he had to move him. And I don't like moving, A, the best player in the trade, or B, somebody with such a high ceiling that we got flashes of 2 years ago. That was his best season 2 years ago. The 22-23 season was easily his best season. That's when he put up 43 points. That's when he was not miscast as a shutdown defender, and he looked great. But he never put it all together after. A lot of it is being miscast as that shutdown defender. And whatever the mess was last year, we'll move on from that. He has the potential to be a legitimate star in the league. And I don't think anybody can really argue that. It's whether he puts the potential together. And Carolina's a great landing spot for him. Look at what they've done with basically every defenseman they've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
They got a 95-year-old Brent Burns to put up ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, I do wonder. Obviously, the 43-point season does jump off the page, and I was always much more on the side of I'm going to defend Keandre Miller. I thought he was a really talented player, and just oozing with potential, as you alluded to. But there were always glaring holes in his game. Now, you could argue that the Rangers should have developed a better overall roster and should have had a more sort of coherent and consistent, coaching presence. He played for 3 coaches across his 5 seasons here. Did he play 5? Was it 5 seasons?
About that, yeah, 3
Yeah,
coaches:
and he had 3
Quinn,
coaches,
Gallant, Laviolette.
right? And that that is difficult for any player of any experience level, let alone a guy who is not only young but learning the position on the fly. We talked about this all the time with Keandre. He came up a forward, right? He only started playing defense when he was 16 or 17 years old. So, that is and that's the steepest learning curve on the ice. People say that all the time, that it's the hardest position to develop into a pro is at defense. So at the NHL level, especially. So look, ultimately, I do think still the 43-point season is a little bit of an outlier because you see that happen sometimes with defensemen will have random jumps in their production that they'll happen to have a very good on ice shooting percentage. They'll double their own personal shooting percentage in a particular year and score 10 goals instead of 5. So, I don't know that he has the I'll say touch to his game to ever become a consistent 45 to 50 point plus defenseman. I do think he could be a very good two-way defenseman, like a legitimate first pair shutdown left defenseman. Now, Carolina already has one of those in Jacob Slavin, but what a great guy to learn from. They'll I'm sure optimize Keandre's minutes on the second pairing. He won't have to do the heavy lifting he did with the Rangers. Part of me is still a little bit upset that we never really got to see an extended run of Miller and Fox together. When we did see it for the first 12 or 15 games last season, it was gangbusters. Whenever they put it together for short stretches throughout his first few years on the team, they always put up excellent numbers. I think there is a world, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Dave, because and I don't know how, I'm not asking you to do the math that quickly in your head, but I've been thinking about this over the last couple of days. Is there a world where, as opposed to doing what they did, which is extend Will Borgen and trade for Carson Soucy, could they have basically had their cake and ate it too by saving enough money to extend Miller to a long-term deal, maybe not 7 years or 8, maybe 5 if he would have accepted that, and also get Gavrikov in free agency? I don't know if the cap works. That might not leave enough room for Will Cooley. It might not leave enough room for other business that would need to get done. Maybe the Shesterkin extension made that all moot. But I just wonder if they didn't plunk down money for Borgen and trade for Soucy, if they could have gotten both Gavrikov and Miller. And then you're really looking at something that looks like a contender level decor, at least in terms of the top 3 spots.
That's tough.
It would have been tough.
So Borgen and Miller are combined $7.35 million, roughly.
Right.
So you'd have to take both of those out. Let's just assume that's Keandre Miller's salary. Those two, so about those two, you put in Miller. So you got Fox at 9.5, Miller at 7.5, and Gavrikov at 7. It's actually, his cap hit is weird. It's like 6.992 billion.
Oh, wow.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like $8 grand under 7 million. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So then you also have Braden Schneider at 2.2 million. So that's three. That's four. Defenseman Urho Vakanainen at 1.5 million. So you have about 2 million to spend on another defenseman. So do you go in with, in this case, Matthew Robertson
Right. Or do you do
as your
what?
7D,
Right.
or
Right.
do you find a bargain bin guy like what's it? Florida just signed Jeff Petrie to a league minimum deal.
Hmm.
You go
That
in and
was
get
my
a Jeff
thought.
Petrie. It's doable. It was certainly doable, but again, back to the contract thing. Did Keandre Miller even want to be here? And
Exactly.
it's okay for him to say no. Like, it's fine if you want to not be in New York. A lot of people don't want to be in New York, and that's perfectly fine. And he's a Minnesota kid. So maybe he was just thinking, you know what? Too much of a mess here. Don't want to deal with it. Too much media coverage.
Hmm.
Too many temptations off the ice. Maybe just want to go somewhere, a little quieter.
Yep. Yeah.
And
And that's his right.
yeah, it is his right. So mathematically, it could have worked, and they could have had their cake and ate it too. But they wouldn't have two first-round picks in 2026. They wouldn't have an additional second-round pick, or a second-round pick, I should say, in 2026. So now instead of just their own first rounder and that's it, they have three picks in the first 64 next year. And Scott Morrow was Carolina's top ranked prospect by Scott Wheeler.
Hmm.
And Wheeler's the guy that Will trusts. Wheeler is the guy that Hope trusts. So via the commutative property, I trust Wheeler in his rankings a lot more than any of us trust Corey Pronman at this point. So I think Scott Morrow breaks camp with the Rangers.
I do
I think
too.
people are really underestimating how good this kid is. He put up 39 points in 52 games as a rookie in the AHL, which is tough to do.
Very.
He's 6'2, 195 pounds. He's a solid skater, great offensive instincts. And in Sully's system, it's a lot simpler and puts a lot more pressure on the center than it does the defense. So as long as the Rangers have good centers, which I'm sure we'll get to, I don't see how you can look at this trade as a bad trade. A lot of people are saying it's essentially Miller for Gavrikov, Morrow a first and a second, and it's hard for me not to agree with that take.
Right. If that's the case, I would say Miller and Gavrikov are in terms of who's the best player of the two. Gavrikov's the more polished player, and he's more of what
Yes,
the Rangers need, right? So,
that's the other piece.
right.
Gavrikov is what the Rangers need. Miller may be what the Rangers need, and they're going for what they need now.
Yeah, and look, really quick on the Gavrikov signing. As soon as I saw the number and the term, look, I'm a little scared about the 7-year term, but everybody is. Um, but 7 million, so he's getting less than Provorov, which is a contract we talked about earlier in the week, and he's very much, he's not a complete black hole offensively either. He is, and I think it was Mike Rupp on the NHL Network. I had the NHL Network on a little bit on free agency day. The first guy that he compared him to was Slavin. And look, there's not a lot of Jacob Slavins in the league, or even guys that you would kind of put in that category. But Gavrikov is that type of defenseman, right? He is a really solid, primarily a shutdown guy, but also a guy that can put up, as he did last year, 30 points. Can read the play and get in on the offense when he has to. So, look, this is Chris Drury did not commit. Of course, he never does, and he's very much going to defer to Mike Sullivan, especially now. We know they have a good relationship on the lineup, but he didn't commit to Gavrikov playing with Fox. I mean, I certainly want to see that. I think that's kind of the whole point here, is to be able to basically completely control the 16 or 17 5-on-5 minutes those guys will play together. That's just, to me, seems like a no-brainer, and then you kind of figure out the rest. Unless the bottom four is a complete train wreck, I don't think it will be. I think there's enough there. And with, as you mentioned, Dave, whether it's Sullivan's system, whether it's the centers doing their job defensively, it is still a 5-man sport, team sport when it comes to playing defense and controlling play. Hopefully the other 4 defensemen that are in the lineup can hold their own, and then you can really just dominate the Gavrikov Fox minutes. So that's what I'm hoping to see, at least when the season starts. Obviously things can change as we get a sample size going, but back to the contract. When I saw it, had a little bit of trepidation, but the more I've slept on it, the better I felt about it. And I do think that you're paying for, of course, years 5, 6, and 7 may not be great, but the idea is that in the first 4 years, you are transitioning from this sort of like retool year into a 2 to 3 year contention window, and you'll still have the best of Gavrikov on a reasonable number during that window.
I love the contract.
I
really do. I love it because, and hear me out on this, Gavrikov doesn't have the mileage on him that most players do at this point.
Mm-hmm. He's only 29, yeah.
He's only 29, but 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24. He only started at 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, the most he played in a season was 60 games in 2018, 2019. And he really didn't get to full seasons until 4 years ago, 21, 22. He lost half a season to 2 half seasons for COVID. He doesn't have the mileage on him. There is a legitimate chance that this contract does not age well, but there's a legitimate chance this contract avoids that whole issue we're going to have with aging.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yes.
I can't talk right now.
There's a good chance that he's actually fine in his age 34 season, which is what you want.
Yes, thank you. 2031, 2, 3. So by 2031 season, he switches to a modified no trade. It's a 15-team list, which is a little less than half the league, and it's a movable contract, $5.4 million due for both of those final 2 years if his game goes to hell. But again, he doesn't have that mileage, so it may not go to hell. But the whole plan here is they moved Miller out to create space for A, an immediate need, and B, somebody who will be able to coach an EJ Emery and a Drew Fortescue. Fortescue? I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think it's Fortescue. Yeah, you had it right.
It's Fortescue?
Yeah.
Coach both of them on just that defensive play. And both of those guys project out to be top 4 defensive specialists. Emery is already turning heads. He's the real deal. Mm-hmm. And Fortescue has a little bit more offense to his game, but he's still solid. And the whole point, and I misspoke in something I wrote this morning that Emery was a left-handed defenseman. He's a right-handed defenseman. I butchered that one. But the point still remains. The Rangers now will have Fox and Gavrikov as their solid top pairing. It doesn't matter what Chris Drury said. Chris Drury's not going to make roster decisions in July.
Right.
Like, that's Sullivan's decision. He brought in Sullivan for a reason. Drury's not going to commit to something because you never know what happens. You never know, because Carson Soucy actually had decent numbers with Fox, and his skill set works well with Fox. I just don't like that he skates in mud.
Mm-hmm.
So you never know. And then if you have those two as your top pair, let's say you get Morrow and Emery, Morrow and Fortescue as another pair, and then you have Emery as another shutdown guy. That's 5 solid defensemen under 30 years old in 3 years.
Right.
Sorry, 4 under 30. And I'm forgetting Schneider. There you go. That's your last one. I'm trying to do this piecemeal, and if my thoughts sound jumbled, it's because we're breaking my youngest of the pacifier tonight, folks. So it's been a rough night already.
It's always fun.
It's always a little rough. But anyway, back on point. The Rangers are pretty set on the blue line for the next minimum 3 years, possibly 4.
And this is also, it's actually made me, when I was reading your piece, Emery's handedness, neither here nor there. it also made me sort of think about how, look, these are always painful processes, and it's in the moment when you're not winning, everyone's going to face criticism, rightfully so. And Chris Drury's made a lot of very questionable decisions, right? So I'm not going to now do an about face because he had one, good day or a couple of good days in free agency. Um, but as I was reading your piece, I thought about, look, if you step back and you do the wider lens analysis, he decided this, folks, when they lost to Florida 2 years ago in the conference finals. He decided that this team needed to be turned over. And you have to think about it this way. He took over the job, whether you think it was a power move or not. And if you think he was behind the firing of JD and Gorton, then that's fine. And I don't want to litigate that right now.
It's neither here nor there for this
Exactly.
conversation anyway. It doesn't
But
matter.
he took stock of the team, and he basically said, okay, we've got a lot of really good players under contract. There's not much I can do. So let's ride this out, and I will tinker on the edges of this roster, and let's see how far it goes. They made 2 conference finals in 3 seasons. They were pretty much a consistent playoff team, obviously, until last year when it all fell apart. And I think he just decided, okay, this version of the team has run its course, and now I need to turn it over. And remember that a lot of the guys that he moved on from were not his players. And I think that this is something that, right or wrong, these were Jeff Gordon and JD players. They were, I mean, the Trouba thing, you really can't hold that against Drury. That was all John Davidson. He was all over that move. He was the most excited man in the room when the Rangers did the press conference announcing the extension. And look,
Drury, you're talking the contract, not his trade, and how that was handled.
Yeah, right. Original. Yeah, well, because they traded for him, right? And then I'm saying when they extended him, they gave him that 8-year extension or whatever it was. My point is that wasn't Chris Drury's move, right? And the draft picks of Kakko and those drafts and Lafreniere, again, those were no-brainer picks, and you can't really hold them against anybody. But the point is that if you step back and look at this team from a 30,000-foot view, the general manager made the decision that it needed to be changed drastically, and he had to start moving pieces out. And the pieces that he could move were the ones that have moved. Obviously, look, Mika Zibanejad's probably here for the life of that contract unless things really, really change. But look, he's committed to Igor Shesterkin long-term. He's committed to Adam Fox long-term. He committed to Lafreniere long-term. We'll see how that shakes out. I think this is very much a make or break year for him. Will Cooley gets his bridge deal. But this is very much Chris Drury's team now. And I'm not absolving him of, God knows, the Buchnevich trade. It gets mentioned every other podcast. But the point is that every GM has his hits and misses. And he is now diving feet first into a fully realized version of a Chris Drury hockey team. Whereas the first few years was very much this is actually a Jeff Gorton, John Davidson team, and I'm just tinkering with it around the edges. So we will see where this ends up. But the point is that you're going to look up at this roster on opening night in 3 months, and it's going to look a hell of a lot different than the roster that took the ice opening night a year ago, right? And that was the whole point of this. And now we need to give it the room, and we need to give it the time to play itself out. And that's why, like, this season to me, and I was talking to a friend about this last night, like, there's been so much drama and so much off-ice stuff and so many rumors and just so much stuff that has nothing to do with hockey over the last 8 or 10 months with the Rangers. They just need to settle in and be a normal hockey team starting in September. When they get to camp, everybody get there, put on the fucking equipment, and go out and play hockey for 3 months. And let's see where we stand, right? Dave, and whenever we go through a season, we always talk about those mile markers, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, the first 25, 30 games, you tinker with lines. By the middle of the season, you want to kind of understand what your optimized lineup is and obviously use that as much as possible. You get a sense of what you need to do at the deadline. Like, there was none of that last year. Last year was a complete rat race from the moment the team gathered in training camp. Larry Brooks has been saying it all year that the first day of camp, everything felt off, and everybody kind of knew it was going to be a bad season when they got there. This year, it's very much just like, hey, we are here to play. There's nothing else to worry about. Let's just go out there, work hard, find out what our identity is under Mike Sullivan, and let's see what kind of team we are in by the Winter Classic in January, right? When they're down in Florida playing the Panthers. Like, let's just see what the Rangers are in the fall, and then we can assess if Chris Drury knows what the hell he's been doing. Because I
They have
think
the Winter Classic this year?
they're in the Winter Classic, and it's in Miami. It's at the stadium the Marlins play in, which is an indoor stadium. Yeah, it's Rangers Panthers.
I did not know that.
Yes,
No,
the
that's
NHL is
a very good barometer. Then that's that midway point of the season, and we'll know A, where they stand, and B, how they shape up against the cream of the crop.
right, exactly. And I'm excited, honestly, for that. Like, I'm excited to just hopefully talk about hockey and not rumor mill stuff and who's unhappy and who's causing the consternation. And, is Drury sending messages through the media? Like, I don't want to deal with any of that. I just want to talk about the games. I want to see what this team looks like at 5-on-5, because, Drury did definitely in his press conference, there was a direct acknowledgement that they just need to get way better in the defensive zone. Obviously, if they do that, that should drive better 5-on-5 metrics and results. Because they've been a tire fire in their own end, even in their best seasons these last few years. They've always been scattershot defensively. So, it's time to just, play hockey. And then at that point, I think we'll have a good idea, like I said, of whether or not Drury's on the right track here. But certainly a couple of days into free agency, it's a good start.
And they're not done yet. There are still a lot. So the defense we know is done. The pairings, despite what Drury said, he's not going to commit to lineups. But Gavrikov is going to play with Fox. Let's be real. The forwards, I know people are still up in arms. There are still a lot of questions to be answered, such as which of the kids are going to make the team, Offman, Perot, and Berard. What exactly is Yusuf Parsonen's role? Who's going to be the third line center?
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing that this offseason showed me is Zibanejad is still viewed as a center.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
Mike Sullivan will play him as the second line center. And I want to be very clear in that second line center. So if we assume JT Miller, who is good enough in all three zones and on the back check, that he can carry Panarin and Lafreniere, who are all offense, minimal defense, and we can assume that that's the top line.
Mm-hmm.
Zibanejad's probably going to get Will Cooley, and my guess is Brennan Othman is the one that makes the team. Hope put something in our group chat today that he actually has solid possession numbers.
Yeah, his underlying numbers were really good. I saw that
Yeah.
too. They were really good in his 25 games. And, look, I've called this out. You mentioned it too. He didn't score any goals. That's a bit of a red flag. But if the underlying numbers are good, then that shows me that you can hack it at this level. And then hopefully the results come.
Yep. Yep. And then you have a line of one of Berard or Parsonen with Trocheck, and it's not Darren, it's Taylor. Radish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to screw that up 50 times next season, minimum. We might actually want to start placing bets on that. So then you got the Trocheck line with Taylor, Radish, and whichever other winger he has, Berard or Parson. And that's a position that's of need right now. If Berard doesn't have it and Parsonen just isn't it, then you're going to need another winger. But
Mm-hmm.
you let them play it out like we were talking about a couple weeks ago. You just got to let Sullivan do his thing, play it out, give them specific roles. Miller is going to be the top line guy. He's going to draw all the top competition, which is fine. Zibanejad, you can shelter him in offensive zone starts with Cooley and with Othman. If you want to swap Cooley and Panarin, it's fine. The top six don't really matter at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We know who they are. You give them offensive zone starts. You give Trocheck secondary or primary shutdown minutes at home, and then what would amount to secondary shutdown minutes on the road when they can't match up.
Right.
And then you have your fourth line, who the fourth line last year was great. Estrom, Carrick, Rempe. You give them defensive zone starts, and you stop messing around with the Rangers defense pairs and matching up against forwards. Enough with that crap.
Mhm.
3 straight coaches have done that, and they've done it to the point where they killed Trouba in New York, they killed Keandre Miller in New York, and it just doesn't work in today's NHL. Forwards against forwards. And then you give Adam Fox offensive zone starts if you can.
Mhm.
That's it. Don't mess around with the defense, and Mike Sullivan knows this. They're complements to the forward matchups.
Right.
You don't match up defense, and I'm so sick and tired of having this conversation every year. Stop matching up defensemen. It's
No, I
annoying.
think it's a great point that and because it's more important, I think, to just keep your defensemen fresh and not overuse your top guys and yeah, I really like the you should basically be on a strict rotation essentially, just roll through your first, second, and third pairs. Um, and like
And
you
the
said,
Rangers can this year, by the way. They have a good enough defensive group that they can.
right. Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I agree. I think you will see a bunch of, as expected, right? Especially the first couple months of the year, there will be tinkering in the top nine. But I do expect Zibanejad to be at center, and I think that's a good thing. And I think, look, this is an important year for him too, because he has every excuse removed now. And look, and I know that there's been some, if you read between the lines and I try not to get too much into the personal lives of the players, but with his wife putting stuff on Instagram and like, there was, I think, an understanding that he might have been going through some non-hockey related stuff. We already know he's a pretty sensitive soul. So certainly all the in the locker room turmoil and the stuff going on with Kreider and the stuff going on with Trouba would have affected him mentally and emotionally. And he wasn't playing well. And he's kind of the type of player that doesn't always handle the questions from the media well when that's happening. So the hope is that he comes in with a clear head, but also he needs to understand that he has none of those excuses this year, right? He has
Mm-hmm.
been kept in the loop by Chris Drury. Mike Sullivan flew all the way to Sweden to visit with him. So presumably he understands what his role is going to be and he's happy about that. Again, we think it's going to be center. I think that's probably right. It's probably where he wants to be. Um, and he's just got to go play now and not worry about all of the external factors that have affected his game over the last couple of years. We do actually, on the subject of lineups, so we do have a couple questions that came in on Blue Sky. One of them actually, and this is, I want to get your thoughts on this because it actually was speaking to the, basically the lineup you just proposed. This one comes from Captain Jack dash NYR on Blue Sky. So he says, so Sully created the HBK line. I think that was Hagelin, Benino. Who was the third guy?
Kapanen?
Kapanen. Yeah, I think that's right. Sullivan created the HBK line in Pittsburgh with a defensive center, speed winger, and a big winger that can shoot. What do you think of our version of that line being Berard, Trocheck, and Cooley? And is that something we might see as a kind of energy third line? Again, how does that affect the rest of the lineup? But do you think that that's a path they could pursue?
So speedy winger, defensive center, big scoring, big winger.
Yeah, big guy shooter. So obviously Berard being the speed guy, the relentless forecheck, Trocheck the center who is a good two-way player, and Cooley who does have plenty of size and a shot that can beat a goalie.
I don't know. I like the idea. I like the tying back and I like the creativity. I don't know if Berard is that guy. So Berard,
It was
a
Kessel,
lot of
by the way,
people are.
not Kapanen. Phil
Oh, it's
Kessel, sorry. Yeah,
Kessel. Close enough.
yeah.
They had Kapanen was on that team though.
Yes, he
Kasperi
was.
Kapanen.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was Phil Kessel was on that line.
Okay, close enough. So the Rangers don't have a Phil Kessel, to be very clear.
Right.
They
They
don't
don't.
have somebody with that kind of a shot. That's what made Kessel is that shot.
Yeah.
The closest they have to a shot like that is actually Othman.
Right. That's true. That's the scouting report on him.
And I was going to say sub in Othman on that. I think it winds up being in this scenario, Cooley, Trocheck, Othman.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because Cooley's a skater.
Mm-hmm.
and Othman has that shot, and he's not the best. Like Kessel is not the best skater, but he
Right.
just knew how to shoot.
Yeah, get in spots to get a shot off.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what
and
Othman
that
needs to learn, really. That's why he didn't score.
yep. And I think with Sully being so good at generating scoring wingers, I like the idea. I just don't know how the Zibanejad line looks if you take Cooley and Othman and put
Right.
them with Trocheck, because then
Right.
you're looking at Zibanejad and Radish.
Right. That's a weird line. And then you're asking Zibanejad to be a shutdown guy who, look,
He's
he's a
not a shutdown
he's
guy.
no,
He's
he should
not.
be he should at this point in his career, he should be an offense first. He should be what Derek Brassard was on the 2014 and 2015 Rangers. That should be his exact role.
Yep. He should be a offensive zone sheltered second line slash third, however you want to list it. 2C, 3C. It honestly, it's semantics at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Offensive zone, sheltered starts, give him guys that can score. Again, Othman is that lethal shot. Zibanejad's got pretty good vision.
Mm-hmm.
Cooley is a guy that kind of fills in the gaps there, goes into the corners,
Yeah,
can
and Cooley
draw
is
attention.
he's also such a he's the closest thing they have to a Chris Kreider replacement, like an actual one for one, like that style of player. Now, look, he's not as good in front of the net, and I actually think Cooley's got more facets to his game. Kreider ended up becoming a very great, but he was essentially like a one dimensional player. Um, when he figured out how to score his goals, he doubled down on that, and that's why he scored 52 a few years ago, and why he became a consistent, 35 plus goal guy. But Cooley, I think, is that he's there. He is the new power forward on the team, right? That was Kreider a few years ago. Now it's Cooley. So yeah, that's why I think he does potentially fit with Zibanejad, because Zibanejad has succeeded with that type of player before.
Yep. And that's why you put them in that scoring role. And I wonder, so I don't know enough about Taylor. Right? Wow. I'm hesitating every time because I'm so used to Darren and I'm going to screw this up so much. So Parsonen, I don't know enough about, and Radish, I don't know enough about. Trocheck really should be their uh, non-Miller based shutdown defenseman, shutdown center.
Mm-hmm.
So Miller's going to get tough competition. That's just how it is, especially if he's with Panarin and Lafreniere. So Trocheck will wind up getting the other part of the top six. Radish is obviously a defense first. He's got great defensive numbers.
He does.
Fantastic defense. He
I
can't
think
score
he's
to
a
save his
shutdown.
life.
I think he's a shutdown guy. Yeah, I think he's got to
Yeah.
be on your third line as a shutdown guy.
Yep. So you put him with Trocheck. You have 2/3 of a shutdown line, but you need them to also be able to chip in offensively. I don't think Parsonen's that guy. And I don't know if Berard is that guy.
Right.
There hasn't been enough of Berard. Now another wild card is Gabe Perreault, who I do not have making this team out of camp, out of camp, out of camp, out of camp.
Right.
Don't clip that, people. Out of camp. If he does make it out of camp, he is with Zibanejad and Othman as an offensive zone player, or
Mm-hmm.
you shift, or you put him on the top line with Miller, so you don't have two rookies and Zibanejad. You could play around with that anyway.
Yeah, you could shift Laugh down to play with Zibanejad. They've had some success in the past.
Yep, yep. And then you put Cooley on that line with Trocheck and Radish, and that's a pain in the ass of a line to play against.
Yeah, and that line could score a little bit too.
Yep, with Trocheck and Cooley now, you have enough offense and pain in the ass at defensive structure that's a hell of a third line, but that is dependent on two of Othman, Perreault, and Berard making the team.
Right. And then you wouldn't want to stack the two of them on the same line. So you have to figure out how to configure Panarin and Laugh. And if, then you're splitting them up. Yeah, no, look, this is why Mike Sullivan is going to be the highest paid coach in the league, right? He has to make these puzzle pieces fit together. And I think he will. I mean, and again, we will see the growing pains in the first 10 or 12 games. That they'll probably look a little disorganized. The only time they haven't was Laviolette's first year. And, the whole team was very locked in from the start. They took to his system well those first 3 months, and they kind of, they were in the 1-3-1. and they had such a great start and they never really looked back. I mean, that was a great season. It didn't end the way we wanted it to, but they responded really well to Laviolette. Look, even with the supposed simplicity of what Sullivan's going to put in front of them, you can always expect growing pains. It's a brand new team too. There's much less continuity from last year to this year than there was in Laviolette's first year, going from Gallant to Lavi. So you'll have some growing pains. You're going to see lineup tinkering. But I think by November, that first sort of mile marker with Thanksgiving, I think that's when we want to understand what the approach is going to be from a lineup construction standpoint. And look, there could still be other moves made. The Rangers don't have a ton of cap space, but they might be able to make one or two other additions. That there might be an interesting player or two coming to camp on a PTO. I'm with you that I don't think Perreault is going to make the roster out of camp, but maybe he blows everybody away, and that changes the calculus too. So that's what we'll be locked in on as camp approaches. One more question, and this one is one we've talked about a few times here, but it comes from Surly Sailor on Blue Sky. Do you expect Schneider to move to a top 4 left defense role? If so, do you think Morrow makes the team, or does he go to Hartford with Vakanainen and Susi being in the bottom pair?
Ooh. So I have to stay consistent. I think Morrow makes the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that case, you get Gavrikov Fox, you get Schneider Borgen, and that's your shutdown pair.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, quote unquote, shutdown pair. Like defensive zone, 30 seconds left in the game, you need a pair out there. It's probably Gavrikov and Schneider at that point. But
yeah, or Gavrikov and Borgen. It might be Borgen.
Yeah. So, and then you have Susi, Saucy, however, and Morrow. And I'm not sure how I feel about that third pair, but like you said, growing pains. We're going to see Morrow have growing pains. They have to see what they have in Susi, who is now on a 1-year, $3.25 million contract, a bargain, based off of what else has been signed and thrown around.
100%.
I still don't like the Oregon contract, but I can't complain anymore because, look at the contracts. Look at Ivan Provorov's contract.
I know.
Holy shit.
And this is why I think Drury did what he did. And look, it's the Borgen extension is the one that sticks out to me that I'm like, did you really need to do that? But if you look at what happened in free agency, I think that was a situation where when they approached his camp about, hey, would you basically take pre-free agency money to stay here and have some security long-term? And once Borgen's camp was amenable to that, they jumped on it because it was a chance to lock in a starter at a decent number before the cap goes up. And that is valuable. And look, there is not exactly a glut of quality right-handed shot defensemen in the league. Now, look, I think some coaches and organizations make too much of the handedness thing. But you wouldn't want to have 6 lefties on your blue line, right? So, and there just aren't that many good right-handed defensemen. There just aren't. There most, a good number of NHL players are lefties. A good number of defensemen are lefties, and that means there's fewer good right-handed ones to go around. So, all these guys, I'll never forget this because I'm just classic sicko Ranger fan who's too online and has too much invested in the team. But I remember in AV's first year, they made a big deal out of the slogan in training camp, which was clean slate, right? That everybody got a t-shirt the first day of camp that said clean slate on it, because obviously there was a lot of Tortorella baggage that they were trying to get over. And look, again, that proved to be the right approach because that team had a very fresh attitude and a different style of play, and they made the Stanley Cup final. So this year is very much a clean slate year. This is not, there are no expectations of like, hey, we just went to the conference final and we're a couple wins from a Stanley Cup final. Like it's a clean slate for Will Borgen. It's a clean slate for Susi. It's a clean slate for Lafreniere. Braden Schneider. These guys are going to get an opportunity under Mike Sullivan to prove that they are long-term pieces here for the Rangers. And if they don't prove it, then fine. And we can all make that determination in due time. But my stance here is that I'm going into the season with an open mind. And I think that that's what this fan base should do. I think now that and as we talked about at the beginning of the show, now that we have a little bit better of a handle on like what Drury's overall vision for this offseason was, he did really well with the narrow path that was in front of him. And now it's again about let's just see what this mix of players coached by this coach can do. And if it's ugly, then you start finding out the culprits of who's making it ugly, and those are the next guys out the door. And that's the process here. Look, as currently constructed, Dave, I don't know if you agree with this. Like, I think this team should be in the wild card hunt the way that Montreal was last year, and they ultimately made it, right? They should be a team that is ascendant, because you could say, oh, well, the Rangers were in the wild card hunt last year too, but they were sinking like a rock from December, whereas Montreal was picking up steam throughout the season. That's kind of what I'm hoping the Rangers can do this season, is be, as they find their footing into December and January, and they're truly comfortable under Sullivan, can they rip off, one of those marches like they used to have under Tortorella, where they would go, 10-2-2, and firmly put themselves in a playoff spot. That would be exciting for the fan base. I think that would reinvigorate the franchise, and that would set them on the next, sort of like that would set them on course for their next window of contention. I think that should be the goal, and I think it's realistic, but I don't know if maybe I'm being too optimistic here.
I think you are right on track. I think, Nick, this coming year is compete for a wild card spot. Actually, given the Metro, they might finish top three. It's Carolina as the clear-cut number one. I am not a big believer in the Washington Capitals.
No, neither am I. And then it's the Devils. I mean, the Islanders, they get better. That has to be said. Hate to say it.
The Islanders are not a playoff team yet. They will be very soon. The Islanders had a phenomenal draft. Their new GM actually seems to know what they're doing. And unpopular opinion, I'm waiting for the Islanders to be good again, because I miss the actual rivalry when both teams were good. Yeah. I miss that.
It's not a rivalry when they're not both good.
No, it's not. Like, the Islanders were terrible for a while. And, well, let's say 94 was really the last time the rivalry was good. They met in the playoffs, and then the Islanders were bad, and then the Rangers were bad, and then the Islanders, and then they were both bad, and then the Islanders were good, but the Rangers were meh, and then the Islanders were terrible, and then the Rangers were terrible. So it's just everybody's happier when both teams are good. So I want them to be good, but it's not this year. So I would put the Rangers as a 2-3-4 range. I'm not a big believer in Washington. The Devils, assuming they're healthy, but I don't know what's going on with Jack Hughes' injury.
Yeah, and I feel like they are what they are, and they're a fine team, but they kind of remind me of the Leafs under Sheldon Keefe, where you were kind of like, all right, yeah, they're nothing to be scared of. They're going to be good. They're going to be in the playoffs, but they're really nothing to be scared of.
Yeah. Goaltending will be their Achilles heel.
Right, even with Markstrom.
So I think the Rangers are in that conversation. And if the division winds up being what it was last year, the Rangers are your number 2 team.
Right.
And we're not that far off from it. Columbus isn't good. Columbus well outperformed what they should have last year. Philly's not good.
Yeah. No, it's a weak. It
is Pittsburgh's bad.
Pittsburgh's they're bad out loud, and they're trying to be bad.
Yeah.
I agree. I also think that, look, that does, I think, assume that everything goes right for the Rangers, right? If they were to finish second in the Metro, that's like, all right, well, everything has gone right. They got the bounce back from Zibanejad. JT Miller's having a 90-point season. The Trocheck line finds its footing as an actual shutdown line. Gavrikov,
Mike Sullivan is Mike Sullivan.
All those things, right? Igor is Igor. But yes, it's not like a 2% chance that happens. It's probably like a 20% chance that happens.
Yeah. And then, so I'm just playing out best case scenario here, and I don't want to get people overly excited, but let's say this plays out that way, where the Rangers are now second in the division, and Carolina's going to run away with it. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But the Rangers become a 95, 98 point team, which is not that far-fetched. All of their top 6 is set. Their blue line, their top 4 is essentially set. They need depth players. They need a third-line winger, right, as of today, a third-line winger and possibly a third-pair defenseman. That's how teams win. They don't go out and get the huge star. Even Brad Marchand wasn't really a huge get for Florida. They get
No,
a fifth round pick or something.
exactly.
Like, they didn't go out, they didn't get the star. Anybody that goes out and gets a star at the trade deadline, how often do they actually win?
Well,
Because
it's
you're
funny,
filling
like,
a hole that you outperformed. Florida goes out and gets depth guys.
right. You've got to have the core in place. And that's what this year is about is how many elements of that core are present on the roster currently. We know Shesterkin, we know Fox, we know JT Miller and Trocheck. Like those are the four sure things. And now Gavrikov. So that's a nice start. Obviously, there's questions around Panarin, and he does become extension. He's already extension eligible. We'll see what they decide to do there. But yeah, I mean, listen, they've got to establish an identity this year. They've got to prove that they can be an above water 5-on-5 team, which they haven't been in years. And that will be good enough for me. Like if I see good process and they're in the wild card hunt, like that will be good for me. And I would be, happy to watch some games and go to some games in March and April that have playoff implications. And if they don't go the right way, then so be it. But at least they've sort of made a step forward and had, a competent year, because last year was just steeped in incompetence from the top down. Nobody was blameless, and that's what they need to distance themselves from this year.
If they can, I'm operating under the assumption they can distance themselves from all that crap.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
But nothing is guaranteed. There are still holdovers from that group. So it's not a guarantee. I think the most realistic scenario is there's growing pains. It's a transition year. The Rangers make the playoffs and are done in a round.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most likely scenario.
I do too. That would be if you were asking me to write a preseason prediction now, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I would say that they're out in the first round, I'm okay with that. Like that's a step forward from last year. And that is at least giving you clarity on the players that you have under contract and the decisions you need to make next offseason going into whoever the hell knows what that free agent class is going to look like, but going into 26, 27, when, you probably really need to finish, it sounds weird, but you kind of have to start completing the picture and getting back into contention, because clock starts ticking on the primes of Fox, Shesterkin. We're already at the tail end of Miller's prime, et cetera. So they kind of have 1 year to get the train back on the track, and then they have to figure out how to complete the picture.
So I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say this plays out as we're expecting. They're third, fourth in the division. They're going to make the playoffs, but they're not beating Florida. They're not beating Carolina. They may not even beat Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with Artemi Panarin at the trade deadline?
That's a great question. It really is. It's a great question. And I've been thinking about this a lot because, there's a lot of reasons to extend him, and there's plenty of reasons on the ice and off to not. And it is a very interesting proposition to. Now, look, the best case scenario is Gabe Perreault is absolutely killing it in the AHL, and he's been in the AHL most of the year, and he's, close to a point per game. He's playing in all situations, and you're kind of right in that middle where you're like, there doesn't make sense for us to buy. We're not going to sell a first round pick or the second round pick, which, has come back to us now in the 26 draft. I think it makes sense to explore a deadline trade, because the haul you could get if he's himself and he's, if he's doing his normal thing, if he's a 35 goal, 55 assist guy, 60 assist guy, like, I would look at moving him, and I would say, hey, you know what? Gabe Perreault up next, and plug him in. He's the same type of player. That's his ceiling. Supposedly, in theory, if he really comes to fruition, you kind of have that style of player in the pipeline ready to replace Panarin. I would explore a trade. At the same time, if Panarin's willing to extend for 4 years, $9 million a year, I think you probably do that with the cap going up.
If the Rangers are very clearly not going to be a cup contender, I trade him at the deadline no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah.
It I think if they surprise people, you keep him and you see what you can do, but I would not re-sign him.
Yeah.
There's too much off-ice drama now.
Yeah, and
The
I mean,
whole
look,
point is to get rid of it.
his game doesn't fully translate to the playoffs either. He has not been a great playoff performer. He's been a okay playoff performer with some huge moments, right? A couple of just totally dramatic, incredible overtime goals. Um, and he's come up in some big spots and made some big plays, but also I don't think he is especially at this point in his career when you can expect a little bit of a decline. Like, I don't know that he's getting you to the finish line during a Stanley Cup run. And I just think it's just a lot of players, the game just doesn't fully translate. There's still good players in the playoffs, but I don't think he's shown the ability to be great in the playoffs. And that alone makes him tradable to me.
Yeah.
So
I would be intrigued to see what happens if, say, Panarin is still putting up his numbers, but you can kind of tell like he's doing it, but the fit's not there, and
mhm.
the Rangers are still good. I wonder if there's a hockey trade that can be made with Panarin, and say somebody's looking for gaudy numbers and they're willing to trade a younger winger. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Dallas surprises people and they know they're not going to re-sign Jason Robertson, so they package him for Panarin plus. I don't know. I'm throwing something wild out there. That is never happening, so don't clip that shit either.
Yeah,
But
that's dreamland. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, that is dreamland. But
it's
still,
yeah, I mean, look, if he's a 90-point player and some playoff team is like, we need another scorer, and then we really feel like we'll be set for a playoff run, then sure, why not? I mean, and they might you could also start a bidding war, because if Panarin is on the market, he's automatically the best player available at the deadline, and teams will
easily,
pay a king's
easily.
so they'll pay a king's ransom. So that's something that Drury will keep up his sleeve, I'm sure. Now, look, by the time you listen to this, I doubt they'll extend him on July 4th, but he could be extended. Drury obviously didn't disclose anything to that effect in his press conference, but look, it's the Rangers. I don't, as much as they, you know, we want to believe that they will do the right thing when it comes to the off ice stuff and the sexual assault allegation and settlement. They have already put out a statement that says we consider the matter closed and we're not going to address any questions about it. Right. So to me, that means if they feel like he's in the plans, then he's in the plans and they'll resign him. I don't think they'll let that be an obstacle, as gross as that is, but that is how most teams do business. That's not unique to the Rangers. The settlement's done. They consider the matter closed. And that could mean that he resigns if Drury thinks he's got a place on the team moving forward. But I don't know if that's the case or not.
Yeah, they can. That's just how it is, and it's shitty. But
For sure.
like you said, all the teams do it. So we want everybody to have a conscience and a soul, but it's not how it works. And in the end, money talks.
Exactly. So no, listen, to sum it all up as we start wrapping up here, I think Chris Drury, like, solid B plus for his first wave of free agents here. Do you think it's an A? Because when you said you love the Gavrikov contract, I was legitimately surprised.
I am aware. I give him an A minus because I didn't want the seventh year on Gavrikov,
Yeah.
but you know what? That's the price of doing business. And there are outs. The way the contract is structured, those last 2 years, A, it's a modified no trade, and B, after his $2 million bonus that Gavrikov gets paid year 6, it's $3.4 million for year 6 and $3.4 million for year 7.
Yeah.
Movable contract.
Yeah. And look, he's a really good player. And I think I think I'm excited to see him with Adam Fox. And, this is, frankly, it's a type of player the Rangers have not had since Ryan McDonough, right? Ryan McDonough, I mean, he had more offense to his game and, was widely considered one of the top defensemen in the league when he was, in his young prime as a Ranger. I don't think he's necessarily at that level, but certainly I don't think they've had this type of player on the roster in a very long time.
Jeff
And
Boom.
yeah, right. But like most contenders have this prototype on their team. Victor Hedman, Aaron
Yep.
Ekblad, I'm trying to think of who else. Alex Pietrangelo with Vegas, right? Like this is not the type of player the Rangers have had.
Rasmus Dahlin.
Right. Well, no, Rasmus Dahlin. Come on.
Am I thinking of which is the good Buffalo defenseman?
I mean, he's good, but is he like a shutdown guy? I don't like Gavrikov's like pure
I thought he
shutdown.
was. Or is that Power?
Maybe that's Power. I don't know.
I thought it was Dahlin.
I mean, Dahlin has great offensive numbers. I know that.
Oh, wow. Dahlin has 70 points. Okay, Power. Okay, maybe it was Power. No, yeah, maybe it could have been Power. I don't know. Did I just pull that out of my ass?
I don't know.
Possibly.
Point being, I mean, look, the Rangers have the offensive punch with Fox, but and he's a good defensive player too. But he needs an elite partner, and he's got that now. So good job by Drury. Will Cooley's back. Taylor Radish is a smart signing, and the Keandre Miller trade was solid as well. To me, it's a B plus. I do hate losing Keandre, but them's the breaks, I suppose, when you're doing business in the NHL. You can't keep everybody. So, Dave, any final thoughts before we sign off here for the 4th of July?
Nothing on the Rangers. I just wanted to thank everybody that listens and reads. The last 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, we eclipsed over 200,000 page views, over 100,000 unique visitors. Usually that's over a month.
Wow.
And this is over 2 weeks. And I also wanted to thank the folks in the comments section. Last time on Monday when we recorded, I had that Detroit Keandre Miller thing, and it seemed like the sticking point was the 2026 versus 2027 first rounder. That was the deal with Albert Johansson until Dmitry Orlov said he wasn't returning to Carolina, and Carolina moved in on Miller. And there was some troll that came over and started posting comments on the site, and the entire comment section was just like, what are you talking about? Things changed in 12 hours.
Right.
And they did. So I want to thank the comment section for that. I really appreciate that. And, pretty good at policing yourselves on that shit. So between all the support and on the traffic and in the comment section, again, just thank you everybody for everything and the continued support. We wouldn't be here without you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been fun. It's fun doing the show every week. Glad to be back doing it every week. And, look, obviously summer will start calming down. It becomes cottage season, as they say, for all the writers. They all go to their, Minnesota and Ontario, lake cabins, and they don't really plug themselves into their phones, which is fine. Everybody deserves a break. So, we'll still do shows. I don't know if it'll be every week, but maybe every couple of weeks. Especially as news breaks. You'll hear from JL again. We may do another, joint pod with the 30 on Broadway guys. I'll see if I can get Becky to do one of these at some point soon. And then before you know it, it'll be hockey season. Training camp will open up, and we'll get our first look at the Mike Sullivan Rangers and how this season is going. But yeah, just to echo Dave, really appreciate everyone listening, reading the blog. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great 4th of July. Be safe. Don't blow any fingers off with fireworks. Wear your sunscreen. Indulge, but don't overindulge. And don't get in a car after you drink. Any other pieces of advice there, Dave?
If you're going to put a firework in your hand, do not close your fist on it.
Yeah. Yes. Don't blow
You leave it open palm, you wind up with the burn. You close your fist, you lose the hand. Don't be that guy.
Sage advice. Yeah. No, but thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time on live from the blue seats.